Got the tape rolling now. Anytime you want to start about something, go ahead.
Maybe you should ask him some
Maybe.
questions, Tom. Okay.
Charlie, I guess he's got the camera rolling, so do you want to just tell about what this camp was and what went on here and with the buffalo? And
are you all ready for that?
Yeah.
yeah, we're ready.
Yeah, this was the last campground of the buffalo roundup when the buffalo on the west side of the river was spoiled, and had to load them in wagons to move them. Up above here is where the little ravine was, where they'd come down when they had the fence across the river, or on the bench up there. They had a wing of fence to throw them into that ravine, and when they come down to the lake, the reservoir or river, when they swam across, they swam right into the pasture. Then when they got into the pasture, why, that's where they had the kraals and chutes for loading the wagons. And I think it was 2 buffalo they would put to a wagon, and they hauled them out of here to Ravala. And the buffalo that was on the east side, like from here up to Valley View in that country, over towards where Pablo lived, they were just like cattle. He'd drive them down with saddle horses. But these others got so spoiled, they'd lose them every time they'd get a bunch of them. So they, Allard, I think, got the contract, and he put in that fence and decided to wagon them out. That's what they done. And when they left, I think my dad said there was about 225 head or something like that. And they took them as far as Edmonton. And then after they unloaded there, they took them, I think he said, about 35 miles to Windwright Park. And this was a natural crossing there after they put in the fence and made a good pasture where they could handle them. And that's where they had their roundup camp, right back in here.
So that the 225 that they got, that was just on this particular roundup. There were other roundups, right?
No, that was the last one.
That was the last one.
Mm-hmm. That was in 1989, I think. Mm. My dad and my brother were on it. They used to be, we got a long book about that wide from up at Banff, and they sent it to my dad. I guess everyone that worked there got them, and then everybody lost them or destroyed them. We lost ours. And here, just before Mrs. Cy Young retired from the bison range, there was a guy come in there, and he had 2 or 3 with him, and he was one of the fellers that had done that. So a bunch of the fellers at the bison range each ordered one, and when I went down to see if I could get one, they said the feller had decided he was through, he wouldn't make any more. And they had a lot of pictures of the riders. A lot of the buffaloes even had buffalo swimming the river. Had Forsyth hanging in a tree where the buffaloes surprised him and he couldn't get away, so he hung up in a tree till they got it by. Then after that, Charlie Russell drew a picture of that, of him hanging in a tree and his camera all busted up.
So can you tell us something about why they were being rounded up at that time? Why were all the buffalo being rounded up at that time?
Canadian government bought them. That's how it was. That's how Pablo went out of the buffalo business, is when the Canadian government bought all these buffalo.
So how long were people camped here?
I don't know. All doing a roundup, however long that was, I never did ask my dad. And Freddie Decker's dad was one of the main ones here too. Joe Hoole and Decker boys, Art Ray, and Roscoe Murray. There was a whole bunch of them guys. And Pablo boys, they were on it all the time. Some of the Ashley.
How big a crew was it altogether? Do you know?
Well, they must have had, I suppose, 30 or 40 men. We got one picture down there, I don't know if you've seen it that day. That was Pablo's bunch, and then they had another one that my dad was with. And I suppose they had that many men all together. They were working both sides of the river.
Charlie, you were mentioning to Dave a little while ago about how the grass was when it was just buffalo down here instead of cows.
Oh, God, there's a lot of grass in here. It's just like the stock that they done up there in that Horseshoe Bend country. It's overstocked so bad that it take 2 years before any of that come back if we had a good year. And them fellers don't seem to realize it.
Yeah.
Just overstocked is what they done.
Well, the only other thing I can think of asking right now is how was the fishing back in those days?
Oh, real good. Yeah, there's a lot of fish in the river here. Where was fishing any place you... The Wayland boys homesteaded, their folks did, up about halfway from here to Camas. And they used to come down here and fish. And God, they said it was just wonderful. And then I think it was Joe and I think Bearhead was in, I'm not sure. They floated the river and they had some guy from Washington, I think he was a fishman or something. They got in that rapids there by Horseshoe Bend, and boy, he was just hooking them great big flats in there. He didn't even want to quit, I guess, for a while.
You might ask him if there were any families that had homes or camps down here, or anybody homestead in this area.
Dave is asking if you knew of any families or people who had camps or homes in this part of the river.
Uh-huh.
Were there any families or people that had homes or camps in this part of the river around here?
Oh, I imagine that come in here just for the summer a while, and then they'd move back either to Crow Creek or some of them places. My Aunt Maggie said that where Kerr Dam is, she said lots of times when she was young and they wanted them big trout, she said that's where they used to go to catch them. And then later on I got fairly fished out some, and then down there by old Ollicott's place, them rapids below there, they were good. I guess they still are. And there's another one below getting towards Moise in the bend of the river there. Of course, in here all that time was you had different kinds of birds. You had a lot of prairie chickens and ruffed grouse, and there was a lot of coyotes and different kind of animals, and a lot of, it was quite a mule deer country. My uncle Tom McDonald told me one time that they used to go up here in the Bitterroot, and I'd wait and watch the dust coming off of them hills there. And be a bunch of mule deer coming down to the Bitterroot to drink. That's when they'd get their bucks or whatever they wanted.
How about elk? Were there ever any elk?
No, there wasn't many elk in here. I never knew elk in here till after I was growed up. A lot of geese in here at one time. They kind of hung along here. And all kinds of birds. But I never knew of anybody running into a rattler here, but up by Ollicott's in through there, there's places there's a lot of, was, I guess still are. And old Ollicott himself told my dad one day he wouldn't kill one, just let them go.
The buffalo were brought in here by Pablo and just turned loose, and they just grazed the tribal ground. And the buffalo were brought in here by Pablo and just turned loose, and then they just grazed the tribal ground. Did anybody hunt them, or?
You see, about the time they had that was before Homestead days. And it was just more or less free range to all the Indians, like old Michelle and Nina made down in that Camas Prairie country. They didn't know how many head of cattle they owned at one time. And my uncle and aunt in Narada sold 2,200 head at one time. And Art Larvey had the contract getting rid of old man Charlie Allard's estate, and he said he had, I think, 3,600 head coming over Garcia Gulch, taking them to planes, ship them out. And Ollicott had lots and lots of horses, and I think when he seen he was going to be fenced in, why, he sold his outfit to Jim Parson, and he moved to Umatilla out of Pendleton, and that's his last place. He died down there.
Were there wild horses in through here?
Oh yeah, lots of them, lots of them.
What happened to them?
Oh, they went out with the homesteaders coming in, people kept selling down. And then towards the last, fox farms and fish outfits got away with a lot of them. My dad had quite a few head of horses, I suppose, 100 head or so there around that Charlotte country when the homestead, and finally we got rid of most of them.
David, there's that story that he told us about the guy from Butte that was going west. You want to ask him about it?
Why don't you ask him? You might remember.
Charlie, last time we talked, you told us a story about a young guy in Butte that was going to look for work west, and he had to cross the river down by Perma.
Is that what?
There was a young guy that was working in, I think it was in Butte, and he ran out of money and was heading west and had to cross the river down by Perma.
Oh yeah. Down there, this side of the old McDonald station, there's an old Ford there, the Indians used. And there was an old guy, or not an old guy, he was young then. He was living in Butte. And he said he wasn't getting any place. So he got himself a saddle horse, took out for Washington. And when he got down to that ford, he tied all his clothes on his saddle, got his horse and swam the river, and when he got him across, he didn't have any clothes on. He tried to get a hold of the bridle reins and he couldn't. The horse would run away from him. So he said every time I'd try to run around him, he'd trot, and when I'd walk, he'd walk. And he says, there I was, my clothes tied on my saddle, not a damn bit of clothes on. About that time, he said he seen an Indian woman coming horseback. She was kind of laughing when she seen him. She rode out there and got the bridle reins and brought the horse back to him. And he paid her, I forget what he gave her. He said he used to tickle to get him. And I got to meet the old guy. One time I was running a bathhouse in Hot Springs, and he was an old Irishman. He said he never got any further than Clark's Fork, Idaho. And when he come up there to Hot Springs, he was raising registered Durham cattle. And he told me that deal himself. And right at that same ford, some of the Indians, Nick Lassaw told me they called it wagon wheel. It was one of them old Red River carts was found there on the bank of the river, because that was as far as you'd go to go down towards Washington. And they left it there, and that's how the Indians named it wagon wheel.
Where was that station?
Huh?
Where is that ford?
Just up a little ways from where that old McDonald siding was, right around them curves.
No, by
There's
upstream from Magpie.
just before you got to the siding, there used to be a Forest Service ferry that went across to the rebound outfit. There's an old dump ground there. That's about where they used to go over to ford the river.
Right, I know where it is.
So most of the Indians at that time was all used fords to cross, but old John Enyas, his Indian name was Sanya, he had a ferry at Moise about the time the homesteaders come in, and we lived down there at the time. And the fellers homesteading to cross, they used to cross there to get up around town. And he's a wonderful old fellow. And got down to Harlee, and he was shot down there, I guess, partying or something. After that, it didn't run long, and cable broke, and it drifted down to what we call the Red Hawk place, and there's kind of an eddy in there, and it floated into there, and that's how they got off. And they never did put it back. And up there in the bend of the river, up there at the head of Moise, there was a pretty good ford there. They used to even cross it with a wagon. And that's for a fellow by the name of Pond, I think it was. He was crossing there pulling a, I believe Charlie Kennedy's dad said was a hay rake and a rake. And he got too far over, and he went into that big, there's a big eddy there. And he went into that, and that's where his outfit, his horses drowned, but he swam out quite a ways, and Charlie Kennedy's dad said that he don't think he was 20 feet from the bank. He said we tried every way to get him to come to us, pounded on the bank and hollered. He went straight down the river for quite a ways and then finally went out of sight. But that was one of the best, well, that ford there at the agency, oil agency, that was a good one. And the Indians didn't live like they do now. Each one had his place. He might be maybe half a mile, maybe a mile from his neighbor. And all these creeks along the river down there below Dixon, that's the way they lived. They had their own places, pasture for their stock or horses. Had a garden or something, they all had gardens. And they never lived like these housing areas. And the only people lived kind of like that was the Kootenays. Kootenai Indians was always a kind of a colonized outfit. If you hired Kootenai to build a fence for you or put up hay for you, you didn't have to go around and get a crew. You just find one of them and hire him, and he'd have his crew there the next day or two. But that's the way they always done everything. That's one reason why they got along so good with this new building they got up there at Elmo. They really work on that kind of stuff. And they had a hard life there. Their end of the reservation was never agriculture country, and none of them went into stock, and trapping and fishing, hunting was their main goal. That's why now that's the only place you can buy tanned deer hides is up at Elmo. Everybody, all our people down there, they won't fool with it. It took too much work. And you don't see any dry meat from down around our place. All the Indians down there get a deer or something, into the freezer it goes. So that's the difference. Camas, baked camas and bitterroot and stuff like that, you very seldom see it anymore. Culture is trying to bring it back. And Camas Prairie was where they got all their camas. There was a strip down there when the weather was real, good wet year, and you'd look out in there and you'd swear it was a kind of a little reservoir, because you could see that blue on there. You'd get out of there and it'd be all blooms from the camas. And his grandfolks only lived about, not over half a mile from it, down there below Bowman's.
I was just thinking, if we started talking about fords, maybe we should just ask them to go up the river.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Charlie, you started talking about some of the places where people would ford the river, and you mentioned a couple down by Moise there. I'm wondering if you could just kind of go up the river from there and tell us where the other fords were.
Yeah. Yeah, that ford there at the agency, I seen my dad direct a guy across there in 1910, and then long when they settled my granddad's estate, he was bringing a bunch of cattle from Narada, and they forded them there. He said they only had just a little short ways to horses to swim, and they'd be out on dry ground. Feller working for him by the name of Louis Brooks said they don't know why he done it. We pulled the bridle off his horse and hit him alongside the head. When he done that, the horse turned over on him. And he said when they found him afterwards that he had a big bruise or something in his head, and they figured the horse kicked him in the head as he fell. Dad crossed that quite a few times. Then on the other side of the river, there was old Marcial lived there. He had a lot of horses. He ran with the Crowfoot. He had a son-in-law, Louis Chalwin, and they used to use that ford all the time.
So are there other fords as you come up the river this way?
Yeah, you can have that, and that where I told you about the wagon outfit went into the river, and then there was another one up there close to mouth of Crow Creek, and then there was another one up there close to Buffalo Bridge when Jim and Michelle was running a ferry up there. But I don't know just exactly the spots. But that's why most of them travel. And how the story went, this old magpie that lived below Parma, they said he was altogether different than a lot of fellers. He just hit that old river where he come to it, and that's where he'd cross. He didn't have any fear of that river at all.
Can you talk about Pistol, George Pistol down there in the old,
Oh, yeah.
that story, him and his brother, or whoever that was that lived close to him?
That little Pistol, or whatever his name was, he had a band of sheep, and him and another Romanian lived right across the bridge from Perma. They got into a fight, and I think that Phillips down here killed him. And they had some kind of a deal with him, and said his mind was going haywire, and they finally got a hold of him and forced him to Warm Spring. And old Burgess down there on Knowles, he kind of looked after his outfit till they done away with it. And he said the only reason he figured that he couldn't get out of Warm Springs was feller was Sanders County attorney at the time, was the one that convicted him, and he was afraid of him, and that's what kept him there till he died. And old Phillips, oh, he was there for 78 years after that.
Anybody have any other questions for now? Anything else you want to say for now, Charlie, or you want to take a break?
I don't know. It's up to you guys.
Okay.